blog series today, The Jimmy Carter Legacy and Lessons from Moral Leadership in the 21st Century, featuring Ms. Paige Alexander, CEO of Carter Center, and Dr. Yawei Liu, Senior Advisor at Carter Center. This program is presented to you by the Center for China and Globalization and hosted by CCG President Dr. Wang Huiyao. Dr. Wang, over to you.
Thank you, Anne. And hello, good evening, and of course also good morning to Paige and Yawei, and also all our viewers in China and outside China. So welcome to this CCG special dialogue again that we're having today. The dialogue series we had for the last 6-8 months has been very productive, and we have carried about over a dozen very prominent and high-level dialogue. So the topic for tonight is the Jimmy Carter legacy and the lessons for the moral leadership and U.S.-China relations in the 21st century. So this is actually live from CCG head office, and we are very honored to be joined by Ms. Paige Alexander, the CEO of Carter Center, and also Yawei Liu, Dr. Yawei Liu, the senior advisor of China at Carter Center as well. So thank you for joining us. And we actually had a very interesting time because about a week ago, we had a discussion with Neil Bush, the third son of George H.W. Bush, and also the president of Bush China Foundation. And of course, we were having this background is because this is China-U.S. exchanges started 50 years ago when Dr. Kissinger first made his secret visit to China. So it's 50 years ago, and then we're in this kind of a contest to looking back half a decade and also the looking to the future. And of course, for the last 40 and 50 years of China-U.S. relations, both President Carter and President Bush has made a lot of contributions. So we are very pleased to have now Ms. Paige Alexander join us. You being the CEO of Carter Center, which is great, and also Dr. Yawei Liu as well. First, I would like to introduce our distinguished speaker and, of course, our panelists tonight. And Ms. Paige Alexander is a distinguished leader in international development, and her career spans across organizations, including USAID, one of the largest and most active international aid agency, and also IREX, and also the European Cooperative for Rural Development. And also she has carried a project in Africa, Middle East, Europe, and Eurasia. So a vast ranging of international development agency. And of course, you joined Carter Center over a year now, and we are very pleased to have you tonight. And also we have Dr. Yawei Liu, Liu Yawei, is the senior advisor on China at the Carter Center and a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. He's also associate director of China Research Center in Atlanta, and adjunct professor at political science at Emory University. Of course, I know Yawei also sits on the CCG Academic Advisory Board, and I remember you were in in China quite often, and also visited quite often in the past. So the topic I'd like to start tonight, actually, perhaps this is because we want to review a bit of the history. I know that President Carter is still alive, but well, and he'll be 97 years old on October 1st, and which is also the National Day of China in China. So we have often heard President Carter say he shares a birthday with the most populous nation in the world. And of course, we know that he actually established the diplomatic ties with China on January 1979. I still remember well, at the end of 1978, I was at the university campus after lunch, working on the path to my classroom. The loudspeaker coming out of the university campus saying that China-US is going to establish diplomatic ties by January 1st. I was such an exciting news then, and we know that China will be open by that time. So I think that was really a great milestone that President Carter has opened that. And of course, he invited the late leader Deng Xiaoping to visit US in February 1979. So from that point of view, what's President Jimmy Carter's most enduring legacy, both as a political leader, but also as a global citizen? Perhaps Ms. Paige, you can start first.
Sure, thank you. Yes, President Carter has often said he shares his birthday with the most populous nation in the world. So I think President Carter's really left an enduring legacy in terms of both domestic and foreign policy. So for a modern day audience, much of these legacies have been recently illustrated in a great documentary I recommend called Carterland, as well as two recent books, one by Jonathan Alter and one by Kai Bird. And it really gives you a much more modern sense of the legacy that he left. But I'll give you a few examples that I admit, even as someone who has served in 3 presidential administrations myself, I was amazed to learn so much of what I touched in those administrations really had their beginning from policies during the Carter administration. So I'll give you a few examples. On the domestic policy legacies, he talked about climate change. So 40 years ago, President Carter became the first president to acknowledge the need for renewable energy. And he had 32 solar panels installed on the West Wing roof of the White House. And he said something about, a generation from now, the solar panels can either be a curiosity, a museum piece, an example of a road not taken, or a small part of one of the greatest adventures that the American people will undertake, harnessing the power of the sun. And now there are a little bit of all of those. We have one of the solar panels in the Carter Library and Museum. There are others throughout the country, but there really are, he has his entire farm is now solar paneled. So, you see that he was ahead of his time there. He was also continuing his domestic environmental protection policies. He established the Department of Energy. He doubled the size of our national parkland and also doubled the wild and scenic and wilderness areas in the Alaska Lands Act. He did things like fighting carbon emissions back in the late 70s and really sought to save consumers money with vehicle fuel economy standards and energy efficient home appliances, which we are all using today. He created the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, which I think everyone has heard in the news, has been essential again this year, especially in the last week with California fires and the hurricane in Louisiana. He was ahead of his time, focusing on diversity. He appointed more minority and women key administrative and judicial positions, 41 women to judgeships, including a name everyone is familiar with now, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who later rose to the Supreme Court. Again, domestically, he created the Department of Education. He deregulated the airline industry. He did things that have become essential in most of our modern days, like it was an oddity at the time, but he deregulated the beer industry. And he also freed up many other industries, such as reforming the federal communication regulations, which really it's enabled the rise of real and fake cable news to compete. And I'll say one might question whether now that was a good idea. But his foreign policy legacies are equally as impressive and pretty much seen altering for the US and internationally. These include some monumental successes like the Camp David Accords, the return of the Panama Canal, nuclear arms reduction with the Soviet Union, and a steadfast belief in diplomacy where he refused to use military means to confront crises such as the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and the Iranian takeover of the American embassy in Tehran. He created the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act to hold people accountable. He established the Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor Bureau inside the State Department, which acted as a moral check on our foreign policy. and normalizations with China, of course, which I'll let Yawei talk about. And then, yeah, and I'll say after the White House, when he left, he spent the last 40 years continuing to show the world what type of person he is. He's always acted from a personal narrative and not a political one. And he has integrity, honesty, and candor, and a commitment to the public good above all else. So his post-White House years have been devoted to causes that are important to him, advancing human rights, alleviating suffering, and offering help and a helping hand to those who need them. So I'd be happy to talk more about the Carter Center and all of his legacies, but I think it's really important, especially for people of my generation and younger, to have a much better understanding of what his White House years were like, because that is one important piece of his legacy. And his 40 years post-White House is equally as important, and I can talk more about that, but I should let Yawei answer some of the questions regarding the opening with China that you were talking about on October 1st.
Yeah, no, thank you, Paige. I think this is excellent, to hear that. And he's really a great president, and he has established a lot of new agencies. And of course, you mentioned about education department, but most of all, I mean, he has such a far vision that has already paying attention to the environment, the climate change in the late 70s. That's remarkable. So he probably is the pioneer on that initiative. So I'm really encouraged to hear that. But of course, after his retirement from White House, he's been so active. That's why he founded this Carter Center that particularly he continued his maintain good relation with U.S. and China, and trying to build really a dialogue platform, conferences, seminars. I visited the Carter Center, many years ago. I was quite impressed in Atlanta that he has such a milestone project still going on. So Yawei, probably you can share with us what's President Carter's legacy for China and U.S. relations, probably.
Thanks, Huiyao. Paige, as you know, Huiyao and the Carter Center, his center, we had a good relationship. He also observed one of the U.S. elections. I think, if I remember correctly, it was 2012 when Obama was running for his second term. So we were in Chicago, we were in Purdue, and we're in other places of the U.S. Now, Huiyao mentioned that 2021 is the 50th anniversary of Kissinger's secret trip to China. I think, obviously there is a conflict of interest here. So for disclosure, I do work for President Carter, but I also want to say the Chinese are unduly fascinated by Kissinger's secret trip and then President Nixon visit with China in February 1972. Of course, this was considered as an ice-breaking trip that opened the door to China. Paige mentioned Jonathan Alter, whose recent book, he's the very best. Actually, I quote him that Kissinger and Nixon only opened the door very slightly, but President Carter and Vice Premier Deng Xiaoping swung the door wide open. There are people who wanted to close this door now, but the door was opened by President Carter and Deng Xiaoping so large, and so many people were able to go through the door, in each of the directions that no one can actually close that door. But back to 50 years ago, if you look at, 1972, after the trip, for 7 years, 6 and close to 7 years, President Nixon and then later President Ford, they were not able to make the final move. And even though President Ford visited China, coming back to the States, he was facing in-party opposition by people like Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. So he wasn't able to do it. Then, President Carter was elected in 1976. And after he got into the White House, I think he issued the marching order to Vance, Secretary of State, but also to Brzezinski, his national security advisor, basically saying, let's get the negotiations started. Now, if you look at the career of President Nixon, it's so much easier for him to say, I want to go to China, or we want to open the door to China, because his whole career was built on anti-communism. He and his committee, House Un-American Activities Committee, ruined the career of so many Americans who were sympathetic with China. So when he said, I want to go to China, no one is going to question his motive. No one is going to say he's soft on communism. But when President Carter was going to do it, he is facing a lot of political hurdles because his predecessor, President Truman, was accused of losing China in 1949. So that's why President Johnson and President Kennedy both wanted to open up to China, but both decided politically it's not possible. They're going to face a rebellion in Congress and elsewhere. And the Taiwan lobby was very effective. So it was in this context that President Carter made the decision, and he personally took care of the instruction. His representative, Leonard Woodcock, good friend. And I remember President Carter telling us, I appointed Leonard Woodstock as the in charge of U.S. dealings in China before there was a U.S. embassy, not because he had good knowledge about China, but because he was a good negotiator. As United Auto Workers, he's good at negotiating with the workers, with the management, with the company. Final thing I want to say here is for Nixon and for Kissinger, opening the door to China is largely a strategic move, because they want to get out of Vietnam. They want to play the China card against the Soviet Union. For President Carter, it is not just strategic, but also emotional. President Carter, growing up in Plains, Georgia, and every week he would donate a nickel to the Baptist missionaries because they were working in China on schools and on hospitals. And then, of course, around his 25th birthday, he was in China. That was his first trip to China in 1949. He was a submariner, and he visited Qingdao and Shanghai and other places. He was really there, witnessing the disaster and catastrophe of the Chinese Civil War. And of course, finally, he was able. And Huiyao, you mentioned he invited Deng Xiaoping to visit the United States. We all watched that visit. I was in college. I was a freshman. On a 9-inch black and white TV, for the first time, we saw live shots of the United States, and then we realized this is not a country that was going to be overthrown anytime soon by China. This is not a country that will collapse anytime soon. And of course, we grew up. I grew up, both intellectually and knowledgeably, with the normalization. So again, I want to emphasize President Carter's contribution to U.S.-China relationship is probably more significant than the Nixons and the Kissingers. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think it's a great review of a historical account of all those landmark years. Of course, absolutely, because I think that that it was President Carter that made the final decision to formally establish diplomatic ties with China, and also issued the two communicate with China. I mean, so that was really important to establish diplomatic ties, and also to actually also cut ties with diplomatic ties with Taiwan and things like that. I think it was really a bold move at that time. But that decision that President Carter made, I think not only changed the U.S. but also changed China, changed the world, because since China and U.S. actually get together, I mean the whole world has really transformed enormously, and in the last 40 some years since both countries has established diplomatic ties. So I think this is really great, and so the legacy of President Carter, when we look back, particularly when we have difficult time now, it's important to review those how this was started, how this was, where did we coming from, and that's really important. Ms. Alexander, I know that you've been running the Carter Center now and as a CEO. And so how did you know President Carter, and how did that position come along, and what have you done that attracted President Carter's attention to be a CEO of Carter Center, such an important organization? Yes.
Well, thank you. I did grow up in Atlanta during the 70s and 80s, but it was not quite the village of Plains, Georgia, where the Carters come from, but it was a smaller place back then. And because Jimmy Carter had been in politics in Georgia and the governor of our state in the early 70s, he was really well known to a lot of people in Atlanta. So when he became president in 1976, many of his staff came from Georgia, and my parents happened to know someone in the White House office, and they had invited my mother to come see President Carter welcome Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister of the UK, in 1979. So I have 3 older brothers, but my mother picked me to see the first female prime minister, and I also then got a chance to meet President Carter. So although I had driven by the governor's mansion growing up, every day going to school because he lived down the street, I had never really met him until 1979 when I was a teenager. So when you fast forward 40 years and they were looking to fill the CEO position at the Carter Center, and I got a call, and I was living and working in Europe, and I couldn't have imagined a more perfect job. My family all still lives here in Atlanta, and it gave me a chance to return home, as my parents say, and be at the helm of a world-renowned nonprofit organization that truly encompasses every single element of my professional and personal career, from the political campaigning to the public service to international development work. So I knew President Carter was a courageous and visionary leader when he was in the White House, as I have just talked about all the things he did, but I've been even more impressed with his post-White House work. So I went through a series of interviews, including a wonderful opportunity to spend the day in Plains right before COVID shut things down. And I enjoyed a whole afternoon with the Carters at their home, having soup and sandwiches and talking about everything from Israel and Palestine to Russia and Syria to farming techniques and agriculture. So after that, I was offered the job, and I relocated here to Atlanta in the midst of COVID. And I've been working in the office essentially by myself for the last 16 months. But the staff has really continued without missing a beat, both in our Atlanta offices and all of our field offices. So this means about 3,000 employees have continued to do the work that they and the Carters have been dedicated to as part of the Carter Center. Mm-hmm. So that's how I came here.
Yes, great stories. Yeah, no, I didn't know that you were when you were young. You were, of course, still young, but when you have a great that connection there, that actually, famous normalized U.S. China relations, and also was translated Deng Xiaoping at that time, and so has been pushing for positive diplomatic ties. I mean, since then, I mean, he's also president of education. He actually, I think probably Yawei and myself all benefit from that, because I remember his scientific advisor gave him a call, and Deng Xiaoping said, we want to send some U.S. student, Chinese student to the United States. And the scientific advisor urgently called President Carter at midnight or something, asked him, how many, he asked how many China wants to send, 5,000 or something. Whereas President, Lady Deng Xiaoping said, we're going to send tens of thousands of, many thousands. But actually, 4 decades past, we had already, probably 3 or 4 million Chinese students went to the United States, and Yawei is one of them. And so you can see that that kind of people-to-people exchanges and ties that really changed China and the United States as well. I think this bond, this academic and the talent flow between our two countries has really greatly enhanced the innovation, enhanced the cooperation, and of course enhanced the culture and scientific exchanges, and of course also business enormously benefit from that. So this is really great. I know that Carter Center was founded by President Jimmy Carter and his wife Rosalind Carter, and so they actually worked tirelessly for the last number of years now, and on that. So Yawei, actually, maybe you could share with us how you were able to work at the Carter Center, and of course your interaction with President Carter since you were there since 1998, which is many years ago.
Thanks, Huiyao, for that question. I think I would like to sort of briefly mention my encounters with President Carter. Paige met with President Carter first time in 1979. I heard about President Carter in 1978. I think, Huiyao, you mentioned you're a college student. I was also a freshman in college when we heard the news that the two countries are going to normalize. I was in Xi'an, in northwestern part of China. My reaction was a little different from yours. You said, that China was going to open up. My initial reaction to the news is, how come, we are going to become friends with an enemy nation, because we were taught to defeat American imperialists, to overthrow the United States and to bring communism to the United States. My initial meeting with President Carter was, I think, almost 11 years after Paige's first meeting with President Carter. I was a student at Emory, and President Carter is a distinguished professor at Emory University. So every year he would have two town hall meetings. One town hall meeting with freshmen of Emory University, and the other is with all international students. So the international student town hall usually happened in September. So I was new, and I was thrilled that President Carter is going to meet with us. So I remember he said, Richard Nixon said there was only one China, but he didn't say which China. I said there was only one China, and that's the People's Republic of China. So the Chinese students in the town hall meeting all applauded. That was the key difference. I think the Chinese press, the Chinese media, the Chinese people should always remember. That's the difference between President Nixon and President Carter. My third encounter with President Carter is actually not an encounter, but a memorable encounter, because I traveled with President Carter to China since 2001 all the way to 2014, so more than 10 times. But during the travel in 2009, at the end of the visit, so we were staying in Shanghai, Jinjiang Hotel. This is where Kissinger and Premier Zhou and I negotiated the Shanghai Communique. I think toward the evening, I was in my hotel room, and I got a call from John Hardiman, Paige's predecessor at the center, and John said President Carter wanted us to be in his suite. So we went to his suite, and he said, John and Yawei, this was a tremendous visit, because President Carter was there to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the normalization. So he opened up a bottle of wine, and the four of us, President Carter, Mrs. Carter, John Hardiman, and I, we finished that bottle. So it was very memorable. And then I think 2011, 2012, I was driving home, and President Carter's office said, President Carter wanted to talk to you. I was very surprised. I said, sure, it's an honor to talk to President Carter. And then President Carter came over the phone, and he said, Steve Jobs called me today. And of course, Steve Jobs was the Apple CEO. And he asked President Carter and asked the Carter Center to help him out. I said, what could the Carter Center do to help Apple's out? And then President Carter said, there are a series of suicide in the Foxconn factories. Foxconn was assemble all the iPads and iPhones in Shenzhen, China. So largely, I think there's an image problem. Steve Jobs think, President Carter is working with China. So hopefully, President Carter could talk to the China side and then, to help Apple overcome the crisis. So I'll end my sort of encounters with President Carter until the second phone call from President Carter this year. I think Paige was presiding over the meeting, and suddenly, to everyone, Beth, President Carter's scheduler said, President Carter wanted to talk to you. So I left the meeting, and President Carter said, "Do we know anyone at the Biden administration?" I said, "You know everyone. We don't." I said, "I'm concerned about the visa issues for Chinese students." So I talked to Paige, and we decided to ask President Carter to write a letter to President Biden to look into the issue. I think in my entire 23 years at the Carter Center, at no time a letter was so quickly drafted, approved, and processed and delivered. In basically about 24 hours, the letter, I think Paige delivered the letter to Tony Blinken, because this is before President Biden was inaugurated, and we got a letter in. So
we got a response back.
And
we got a response back, if you remember correctly.
Right, and I think the Biden administration's eventual decision to allow international students, majority of whom are Chinese students, to come in after August the 1st because of national security. I think President Carter did play a role in that. So back to you, Henry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, this is great. I mean, we've been actually monitoring this CCG also on that as well. I actually talked to the Charge d'Affaires here, the one that left and also the one coming. I mean, this actually student exchange is important, and also many Chinese families actually are quite concerned on that. So I'm glad to see actually, the figure until July that U.S. Embassy here in China has issued 85,000 student visa to go to the United States. And if you're counting that probably issued in August, we probably could see over 100,000 Chinese student visa being granted to the United States. So this is really important that we see a miles long queue at the Pudong International Airport to go to the United States. So this is great. I think that is important because President Carter has set up this bond and welcomed the Chinese student, and also lately the Deng Xiaoping has actually unleashed this student study abroad movement. I think that movement has actually created a lot of generated so many benefit for China because so many talents has returned. There's a talent circulation. There's a brain circulation. That tremendous help the entrepreneurial, scientific, and of course entrepreneurial and industrial revolution that is going on in China. So absolutely. So Paige, actually, I know that you've been working at USAID for so long. You've been looking after many important projects in different parts of the world, and African, and also of course Europe and countries like that. Of course, China also set up a new development agency in 2018. It's called the China International Development Cooperation Agency, CIDCA. And but now I think the developing countries really need a lot of cooperation among the big countries, and particularly the development agency. How can we work together? And also, given the pandemic is going on, and given that the Carter Center has so much experience working in the past in Africa and many other countries, how from development point of view, what's your take on this current situation, and how maybe in the future, and what are the experience that maybe you have in the USAID and others that for development purpose, how can we really work together in the years ahead, probably? Yeah, Paige.
Sure. Well, so just in case we have some people who are listening who do not know exactly what the United States Agency for International Development is, let me give you a quick chapeau of that. It's often called USAID, and it's an independent agency of the federal government responsible for administering foreign aid and development assistance. So the annual budget for USAID is a little over $27 billion, and there are about 9,000 employees, and therefore it is one of the largest official aid agencies in the world. But it's important as China is setting up theirs to fully understand the history of ours. So our history dates back to the US Congress passing the Foreign Assistance Act in 1961. And that reorganized all of U.S. foreign assistance program and mandated the creation of this agency to administer the economic aid. And I think China's gone through a little bit of that with the Ministry of Commerce and then moving the new agency around. But USAID at that time became the first U.S. foreign assistance organization whose primary focus was on long-term socioeconomic development. So USAID's work encompasses humanitarian projects as well as other development work such as global health, agriculture, environment, education, poverty alleviation, and many other programs where we do this through technical and financial assistance mechanism. And because aid's an official component of the US foreign policy, I say we because I worked there for 15 years, but aid receives guidance from the president, the secretary of state, and the National Security Council. We have often said that it is part of a three-legged stool, which includes diplomacy, defense, and development in terms of how we relate to all of our overseas partners. Aid's got field offices or projects in about 100 countries. And all the funding going to USAID that then goes out the door is awarded completely through competitive grants and contracts and cooperative agreements. So all the information as to where USAID spends its money can be found on a handy website called foreignassistance.gov. And this is a dashboard for transparency, so US taxpayers and anyone else knows where their foreign assistance funds are being spent. Over the years, with changing administrations, there are often important signature initiatives. I think anyone listening who has a government that changes as frequently as ours does, every 4 to 8 years, you have recognized this. And we have things such as the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which is also called PEPFAR, and that survived through 3 presidential administrations. You have the President's Malaria Initiative, Feed the Future, which is a global hunger and food security initiative, Power Africa, which was set up to leverage partnerships to increase access to the power in sub-Saharan Africa, and now COVID relief. So there are many programs I could highlight, but those are just a few which really stand out as game changers, which have stood the test of time because they make good development sense, and it's a long-term bet that we're making. So as I understand it, China's new agency provides a larger amount of development finance in the form of concessional loans. And Chinese aid, unlike aid provided by other developed countries, isn't governed by the categories of OECD's Development Assistance Committee. So it's not counted in international statistics. So it's harder for me to make true comparisons. But although China's a latecomer in the international development assistance, I know that China has been engaged in foreign aid in Africa since the early 60s, when it was still a very poor country, but there was still a lot that was being done. But China is really different today, and its footprint is growing bigger and bigger in developing countries. I think Yawei knows as well that President Carter once said he saw the presence of China in every African country he and Mrs. Carter had traveled to. So China's really transformed itself from a developing country to a country getting close to joining the club of developed countries. And foreign aid played a small role in China's transformation. So as a result, China's in a better position in terms of how to engage in this work. But as with all assistance in developing countries, it's a challenge to coordinate the assistance on the ground, to share best practices, to learn from these lessons. So we hope the new aid agency will engage with those who've been doing this work for a while, and we can find ways to work together to help those most in need.
Mm-hmm. Great. And yeah, I think that is probably something that both U.S. and China can work together in the future, because I know that the infrastructure now, I mean not only in the developing countries, but even in the U.S. and of course in China, it seems that the infrastructure transformation is going to be the biggest straw for the whole world to develop. And China already got some experience, and we actually set up a Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and we're joined by 104 nations already on that. And so I think also, as you said, USAID was set up in the 1960s, whereas China now have this China International Development Cooperation Agency set up in 2018. So I'm thinking, Yawei, you've been really at Carter Center for a long time, and of course you involved some project with Carter Center in Africa. But what I'm thinking is now, U.S. and China, we need to find something to work together. I mean, the world will probably need us, and African, Latin American, and all those areas, particularly for the pandemic, that U.S. and China should work together rather than we get into some kind of politics and trying to focus on the source of origin rather than how we can deal with the virus. I mean, that's probably even more urgent, and the world revival leads on that. But after that, we probably need more experience on the infrastructure, how we can work together. I know that President Biden has proposed a $1 trillion infrastructure plan for U.S. I was talking to Neil Bush. I mean, we thought China and the U.S. could have JV, a joint venture company that working in Texas, for example, helping the oil energy export to China and work together. So I know that G7 has proposed Build Back Better the World. I mean, B3W, and of course, China has this Belt and Road Initiative, and we had actually a CCG conference just recently. Chinese former vice minister who look after China outbound investment actually said maybe B3W and Belt and Road can work together. So Yawei, do you see how we can work together on the infrastructure and probably giving your Carter Center experience on working in Africa and other countries? Do you see the possibility of U.S. and China working together in ahead?
Thanks, Huiyao, for that question. Actually, the Carter Center started promoting U.S.-China collaboration in Africa back in 2012, 2013. So we've been working in this area for almost a decade. I also want to thank you because I think you still remember in the middle of working on that, I asked you, whether you know someone at MOFCOM, and you told me that you know people at the Research Institute of MOFCOM, because we wanted to talk to people who are in charge of development assistance to African countries. You mentioned whether China and the US could work together in the international development area. Before we get into the bigger picture, which is infrastructure, I just want to sort of review some of the small cooperative projects between the US and China. I think the first one probably between USAID and China happened in East Timor. It was an agricultural project. Paige, you mentioned everything has to be out, on the competitive bids. I think a Chinese entity won that USAID contract to work in agriculture in East Timor. After that, I think US and China worked not necessarily, after they talked to each other, but also it was through a contract in Liberia. Liberia emerged out of the Civil War and needs to be rebuilt. The US, China, and UNDP worked together to rebuild the University of Liberia. That's why we had one of our meetings in Johannesburg at the end of 2017, because at the time, the Chinese ambassador to South Africa, as Huiyao mentioned, Ambassador Lin Songtian, and also our Vice President for Peace, the former Vice President for Peace, Jordan Wang, was the UNDP Liberia country representative, and Donald Booth, U.S. Special Envoy for Sudan, South Sudan, was the American ambassador in Liberia. So the three of them were there together. So we brought them together, and hopefully they could share, how they were able to work together back then, and could they, make recommendations to the government to see if U.S. and China could work together. So that's in Liberia. Of course, the most important U.S.-China collaboration is in the area of public health, and that's Ebola in West Africa. Carter Center actually was very much involved, but not with China, but with CDC here. But China and the U.S. work together. I think what happened, actually, I think, Henry, you probably want to talk to the China side to basically see how this collaboration was brought about. What happened, who called whom first? From the US side, Susan Rice said President Obama asked her to contact the Chinese government to see if China could work together with the US to contain Ebola in West Africa. So that's the American side of the story. We don't know anything about the China side of the story. And this success, this cooperation was so successful. So when President Xi Jinping visited the US in 2015, this is what Paige mentioned earlier, Barbara Smith was very much involved, is the MOU between USAID and MOFCOM. This is before China International Development Cooperation Agency was formed. And so the MOU was signed. I went to CDC and talked to one of the doctors there. He said, 90% of the MOU work is actually CDC. And what did China and the US do? They worked together. They established the first CDC in Addis, Ethiopia. So this is the first African CDC. And this is a result of US-China work, in West Africa. So again, looking back and looking forward, although US-China relationship is at the lowest point, but there's still a lot of potential for two sides to work together. One, of course, Henry, you mentioned, is pandemic. Second is infrastructure. But all of this, I think, is drawn because of the lack of trust in each other, and also groundless accusation, largely from the US side in terms of what China is trying to do. BRI is a geopolitical move. It has nothing to do with assistance. It's commercial. It's China's sharp power. All of that. So I think the potential is great, but then both sides will have to overcome the current hurdles, and that's going to take time, take patience, take courage. And the Carter Center would very much like to work with your organization, and through you, hopefully, with the Chinese government, to get something going, not to build a road together, but maybe just a small pilot to particularly, like what we're looking into is if China and the US could work together to provide COVID assistance to Myanmar, as simple as that.
Yeah, no.
Back to you, Harry.
Yeah, no. Thanks, Yawei. I think that absolutely, U.S. and China has many areas can complementary and also can really work together. And I know that in 2015, that General Electric and of course also China Machinery Import Export actually signed an agreement to work in a third country as well. China now already. President Xi was talking to Angela Merkel and President Macron on working in Africa. I think Africa, now has such a great, potential. And you mentioned about Ebola that U.S. and China worked together. That could be really good examples. I mean, particularly fighting pandemic and also working on the infrastructure. China has worked on the African infrastructure. Half a century ago, my father worked on Tanzania-Zambia railway. I mean, in the 70s, you know. so that was something memorable as well. And so I really think that there's an area that both countries can work together. I think the world needs us, and the developing world also needs us, and we can really supplementary each other. And U.S. has a long tradition, but China has a lot of new expertise accumulated, like infrastructure. But absolutely, pandemic is really the time that we have to work together. I really hope that pandemic, climate change, and all those great areas, to work together. But as you said, we need to build up the trust. Absolutely, we need to really build up the trust and not really trying to find a problem with each other and trying to really come back to the normalcy that we have actually, maybe in the last several decades, most of the time. So I know, Paige, you were involved in the post-conflict reconstruction in Balkans. You are very familiar with that area, and so maybe you could share some thoughts on those international initiative then, and also the response on the Balkan and how that helped, and even to the situation we have in Afghanistan these days. I mean, again, we need a global leadership. We need a global concerted efforts to really make sure that the area is reconstructed and maybe put into more stable and peaceful situation. So there's anything idea, any recommendation you can give, share with us?
Well, I had the good fortune to work on the Balkans starting in '95 when the Dayton Accords were being negotiated. I would not have guessed that 25 years later, we would still be working in the framework. That would still be the framework that we're living under. So to say that development is not linear, you don't always go from a humanitarian crisis to a post-conflict to democratic and economic programming. Often the crises happen in advanced developed countries, or the interventions needed are due to backsliding, which requires financial or other assistance so we can recoup the ground that we've lost during a crisis. So whether you're in the Balkans, Haiti, Syria, Yemen, or Afghanistan, each is so complex, and it requires a dedication and a really long lens towards recovery that can often change faster than the program work is really able to address. In my time working on Bosnia and Kosovo, I could see the issues were generational, and we knew many of the interventions needed to take time. It really needed time to take hold before the basics regarding rule of law and regulatory reforms could be put in place and show their usefulness. So Afghanistan's a very special case, which we really wouldn't have enough time to cover in this discussion, but the international community should not let its sole attention become the refugee situation. I've seen that happen in Syria as well. So we must really remain focused on those who are in Afghanistan and what we can do to continue helping them live their best lives. It would be wrong for me to surmise what U.S. policy should do now in terms of recognition of the people running the country, but we need to retain some level of discourse so those Afghans who need and want assistance can continue to get it from other countries. On the issue of the role of China and potential U.S.-China cooperation, I think it's fair to say that the top priority for China, like that in the U.S. at the beginning of the war, is to prevent a country from becoming a safe haven for terrorists. China really shares a short border with Afghanistan, and China's got a good relationship with Pakistan, and that influence over the Taliban is very significant. So I hope China, takes advantage of the leverage, which the U.S. clearly lacks. I remember when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she introduced the concept of a new Silk Road, and it's about linking Afghanistan to the South Asian countries like India economically. And at USAID, we actually were in the process of changing our Office of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the Near East Bureau. We merged those for this exact reason, to be able to link. And if China now has the ambitious Belt Road Initiative, we hope that you could include Kabul in the BRI when the latter situation is stable enough for foreign direct assistance and other investments. At the present time, when it comes to U.S.-China cooperation, it probably mainly revolves around speaking with the same voice at the UN. Tony Blinken, our Secretary of State, and China's foreign minister had phone calls, 2 phone calls in August, I know. And the first call was about ensuring a peaceful evacuation of American and Chinese citizens in Afghanistan. And the second phone call was about working together at the UN Security Council to pressure the Taliban to allow continuous evacuations of Afghan people who want to leave, and to permit inflows of humanitarian assistance and stop supporting international terrorism. So Beijing facilitated the initial dialogue also between the US and the Taliban, and China could continue to play that role, as it's going to take some time before Washington decides on the recognition issue. So yes, I do believe that the US and China could cooperate in Afghanistan, but the devil's in the details. Yawei just mentioned some of the successes we've had in cooperation in South Sudan and with Ebola, and the trilateral cooperation that we want on African affairs. So I hope Beijing and Washington will be able to coordinate their policies towards Afghanistan. And I do think it's in both governments' interest in terms of peace and development in that country.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important that we maintain a peaceful and possibly prosperous Afghanistan, so we don't let terrorists rooted there again, and also for the security of Afghanistan, that part of the region, including Xinjiang from China, where bordering Afghanistan, and you know, so it's important that all the big countries work together, and so I'm glad to see that the UN Security Council passed the resolution on that, and so that we can actually see maybe a new birth of a more stable Afghanistan, and where now they are forming a new government, and China is closely watching that, I suppose. But I really hope that U.S., EU and other countries, China, of course, that we can all work together and to ensure a safe and peaceful Afghanistan in the future to come. Absolutely important for that. So Yawei, I know that we're actually talking about the China-U.S. relations in the last 4 or 5 decades. President Carter is the president who established diplomatic ties with China and the U.S. And so what Carter initiatives for all those years, and what else have you done? I mean, after President Carter running this center, founded this center that promoting the China-U.S. relations, so that we're having a complexity of the situation. We're having a lot of argument these days. Maybe it's good to look at the historical and the leadership that President Carter, or the vision he has on promoting a better U.S.-China relations.
Thanks, Henry. I know our time is running short, so I'll be quick. I think after President Carter left the White House, he was immediately invited by Deng Xiaoping to visit China. And after that, President Carter visited China multiple times. I think during one of the visits, President Carter said, now I have my center, I would like to work with China on issues. And Vice Premier Deng Xiaoping said, my son, who is disabled, is the president of the Chinese National Association for the Disabled People. Maybe the Carter Center and his association could work together. So that actually was the Carter Center's initial entry project into China, is to provide special ed education to training for special ed educations. That actually was my first volunteering work with the Carter Center, is to interpret for the Chinese special ed teachers who came here. President Carter said over 900 Chinese teachers were trained here at the Carter Center. And then the Carter Center also purchased a production line of artificial limbs for China, which I think many years ago we got a letter from the Beijing Bureau of Civil Affairs saying, the production line is still working. We want to thank President Carter for doing that. So that's our initial entry into China. Later, from 96 all the way to about 2012, I can summarize our engagement with China as telling the China story. So what was the China story the Carter Center was telling? That's the story that China had real, fair, competitive elections at the village level, because we observe village elections, and I think one of the Chinese officials said, if we say China has democracy, nobody is going to believe it. But if the Carter Center observed and then told the world that there were real grassroots democracy in China, that is credible. So that has took a lot of effort. From about 2012 now, so over a decade, almost a decade, our work largely is divided into two categories. So one category is about reducing misperception, reducing lack of trust, and to increase mutual understanding. So that is our online initiative, U.S. China Perception Monitor, 中美印象, our English and Chinese website. We also organize a high-level forum on U.S. China relations, which began in 2012. The last one we had is January of this year. It's the 8th one. I want to remind our audience that in 2019, in January, we're the only U.S. organization that organized a 3-day meeting on the 40th anniversary of the normalization. No other U.S. organization or think tank really dared to do that because the relationship was at such a low point. We also organized a Young Scholars Forum on U.S.-China relations. So the next one, which is the 6th one, will be held online starting September the 22nd. Now, the second category of the work we do, which is, I think, is more challenging but more significant, is to bring China and the U.S. to cooperate in the third country. We talked about in Africa. I don't want to get into the details of what we have done because of the time shortage. I want to share a sort of an anecdote here so that to highlight the necessity. The Carter Center works in Mali. We have an international ceasefire monitor group over there. China actually has peacekeepers on the ground in Mali. And Huiyao, you mentioned the Chinese government and the French government signed agreement that they're going to coordinate their development assistance in Francophone countries. So, this is all good. China, US, and the French, actually, they're supposed to work together in Mali. So the anecdote I want to share with you is between our consultant, Ambassador Bisa Williams, who's running our mission in Mali. So at the diplomatic gathering, she ran into the Chinese ambassador. And now, again, I heard this from a third party, so don't quote me on this, but what the Chinese ambassador told Ambassador Bisa Williams is that it's people like you, Americans and the French, you're the troublemakers, because you're here, you prolong the problems in Mali. As soon as you guys leave, things are going to be good. So that's the core of the misunderstanding. That's the core of the lack of perspective on each other. That's the core of, from the developed countries like US and France and China, which is a new kid on the block. They need to talk about these issues. They need to basically, even if they don't agree, they still need to figure out, since the US, the Carter Center, China, and the French government, they're all engaged in Mali. They're all spending resources, human resources, and others there. But there is no conversation whatsoever between the stakeholders. And hopefully, again, Huiyao, you and us and other parties, we can set up a case a pilot, just look at the particular country where there is US involvement, where there is Chinese involvement, and we come together, both from the non-governmental sector and the government, USAID, CIRCA, whoever that we can bring to the table. And that brings us to where we're working on is Myanmar. How could China and the US, if not working together, coordinate their policies with ASEAN or with United Nations so that international COVID assistance to Myanmar could be delivered fast and effective. I'll end my sort of data center activities in China here.
Thank you, Yawei. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's part of what we need these days. That particular organization like Carter Center and also other similar NGOs, think tanks, and social organizations, and of course a similar organization in China as well, like CCG also. So Paige, you are the head of Jimmy Carter Center, and you have a lot of experience in international development area, and so I think to really, once again to really we want to revisit this, because we are looking back, but we're also looking in the future. So it's such a challenge in China-US relations. I mean, now the Democrats is back again, but it seems that the political climate is so poisoned in the US now, and maybe that's another popular word, but so negative. And so how really can we change that? And the legacy of President Carter, which he founded and established diplomatic ties between US and China. He actually opened the door for Chinese students. Millions of them went to the United States. He actually was the president, signed the two communique with China and laid the great foundation for the China-US relations. And now this situation is deteriorated. And I mean, President, such an age, 97 years old now, he's still seeing that. So from Carter Center perspective, how do you think that we can repair and work on this relation and put it forward, and so that we can probably have some normalcy, have some expectancy, and not really have a roller coaster like in the President Trump's days, and but even President Biden. I mean, we haven't seen that really getting much better. So as a former President, Jimmy Carter Center CEO, what do you think for the future China-US relation, how we can repair that, and how we can bring to a more normalcy, as probably many people expect that?
So it's a good question. I think there are probably 4 or 5 top lessons I believe others could learn from President Carter. And this goes to the relationship that we want to have with other countries. I think first, wars should always be avoided. Conflicts can be resolved through peaceful and equal negotiations. President Carter certainly followed this when he was in the White House, and waging peace is one of the missions of the Carter Center. Second, I think human rights are always an integral part of US foreign policy decision-making. So human rights are both a political right and a right to live a decent and free life. For the US to be a global champion for human rights, it also needs to respect human and civil rights at home. And this is why the Carter Center has begun to engage in domestic election work, because we recognize there are threats to democratic election standards in the US, including especially in our backyard here in Georgia, given the outsized role it played in the last federal election. I think everyone should take a look at themselves from the inside before we start portraying what we want to be doing with other countries. The third, I would say developed countries have an obligation to provide support to underdeveloped and developing nations. And in today's world, it's not just Western countries that are engaged in foreign aid. Other countries, particularly China, are also moving from Camp South to Camp North, and there needs to be more coordination. Yawei touched on that, about the places we have coordinated in the past and the things we need to do moving on. fourth, I would say one of the most important characteristics of President Carter's leadership is not to submit himself to political pressure and seemingly popular demands when making policy decisions, but make moral decisions that will benefit people in the country in the long term. He lived his administration that way, which is why he probably only had 4 years. But we're seeing the significant benefits of so many decisions by President Carter that were not evident decades ago. And it's because he did not put politics first. He put people first. So overall, I'll say that President Carter's always lived his values, and his vision of a future world is a world where wealth is relatively fairly distributed, racial and gender equality is guaranteed and protected by law, and national conflicts can be resolved through peaceful means. And all major powers, regardless of their political system, as we see in our different political systems, agree to cooperate and collaborate to stop things like global warming and nuclear proliferation, to eradicate diseases, and to empower people all over the world to lead a decent life. And I think these are the places that we can try to come together and have those honest and frank conversations, because I think we each bring to the table something that's very important and a skill set that the other doesn't have. But at the same time, we have to respect that there will be differences. And I think that's the relationship we need to have at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. We need to, really maintain the dialogue and exchanges. I mean, that's probably true that this pandemic has cut off the face-to-face meetings. The frequency of that creates a lot of more problem. So Yawei, what's your final recommendations to, to really put the U.S. and China relation into some kind of a, right track and going forward? I mean, how can we avoid conflict and deterioration on the bilateral relations?
It's not really recommendations. We talked about specific things that both countries and both NGOs like yours and ours can do to stabilize and improve the relationship. I think in terms of the overall relationship, I think first we need to look at history. I'm an American history major, and I think if you look back at over 200 years of this relationship, it's special. Me myself, I was born in China, raised in China, and came here when I was 27 years old, and got the opportunity, to pursue my study and to work for President Carter himself. So I always like to tell people I'm an example of how good things will come along if the two countries are going to open door to each other and they're going to work with each other. I think, Huiyao, you mentioned millions of Chinese came over here. U.S. government and private sector give these Chinese students, I'm one of them, the opportunity, to work here and to excel. And I think there is indeed a special relationship between these two countries. I think Americans, they care about China, and many Chinese, they like the U.S., they want to send their kids over here. We need to protect that. There is a very good documentary called Our Better Angels, and President Carter watched it, recommended it. I think everyone probably should watch that documentary. Secondly, I think it's just basically because, U.S. and China is the largest and second largest economy because of the size, because of what they can do. It doesn't matter it is in Afghanistan or Mali or DRC or any other countries. If the countries, US and China, choose not to work together, then that impact is going to be felt by that particular country. So there is a lot that the two countries can do. And lastly, I think now the USA has declared, at least President Trump's administration declared the engagement policies that, I don't think the Biden administration is going to say that, although the China policy is still under review. So it's what Tony Blinken has said, we're going to cooperate with China where we can. We're going to compete with China where we should, and we're going to confront China where we must. And China doesn't really buy that framework. And China thinks that the Biden administration is pursuing confrontation with China. I think if that's the case, that's the wrong direction to go, because both leaders believe in peace and prosperity for their own people and for the world. And this is also President Carter's vision: is peace, prosperity, decent life for all the human beings. I think the leaders, if they can come around to this, and then they're going to forget, or they can shelve geopolitical concerns. They can talk about their concerns with each other, but focus on, building the world better and higher, and hopefully, this is the vision of President Carter and all of us, particularly here, under Paige leadership, staff of the center, we're trying to live up to President Carter's legacy, and hopefully to spread, if I can use the word gospel, to all parts of the world. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I think we really have to maximize the similarity and minimize the difference and seek the common ground. I think that there's a huge bond. I mean, I can see still existing between U.S. and China, particularly among the people, among the students, among the people-to-people exchanges. So I congratulate Carter Center for doing all those conferences, seminars, workshops, tours. That's really needed, and we hope there will be more of that. So we almost come to the conclusion now, and my staff was telling us we have almost 200,000 people watching us tonight, and but we have collected a few questions online, and so we'll get into Q&A, and so I have a few questions. One question is from China News Service, basically saying, how should we build bridges across cultural differences between East and West, and of course China and the U.S. to seek the common ground where resolving the difference? I think we cover some of that. And there's another news mentioned, how do you view the possibility of a potential Cold War between China and the U.S. and how can we avoid that? So this is another question from another news channel. And then we have news from Guangdong News again. This one probably also to Paige as well. And the question was, you were the U.S. aid deputy for the European region with a focus on the immediate post-conflict reconstruction of the Balkans. This year is the 20-year anniversary of the 9/11 incident, and he said that the Taliban will announce the new Afghan government soon. How China and the U.S. can coordinate the fight against terrorism in the next phase, as well as reconstruction of Afghanistan and Iraq. I mean, also we cover a bit of that, but what I want to say that maybe now we can lump them together, and then you can give your final word and thought of the topic today. It basically is from the Jimmy Carter, the president legacy, and given the current U.S.-China relations and also the world situation, how can we bring this forward? So with those questions, with the concluding remarks, maybe Paige, you want to start? And
Sure. Well, I'll say we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And I think that so many lessons have been learned since that period in time, mainly because we've figured out how to share information in a way that we were not doing it, both internally within our own government and externally with others. And so I think we've made some great strides there. But as I had said in my earlier answer, that we're all trying to avoid war. It's in nobody's best interest. And the fight against terrorism is a war, but it's a war that can also be discussed in diplomatic terms. And so I think this is one of the reasons why we need to, hold each other close, hold our enemies close. It's a conversation that has to happen because I think we're all in this together. It was a very different situation when post-Cold War, when we were working together and rebuilding some of the former Soviet countries. Part of that was, as I said, there's not a linear trajectory in development. And sometimes you can have a fully developed country that's just had backsliding. And so the graduation assistance that we provided in Eastern Europe at the time did not last forever, because that's not where we needed to be. We did not need to continually be doing projects in some of those countries. But I think at the stage that we're at, these conversations and diplomacy, as I said, diplomacy, development, and defense, it's a three-legged stool, and they all have to go together. And we have to be willing to talk in every single one of those areas with our partners, with our allies. This is what's going to get us to the other side of some of these issues. And sometimes, I led delegations with the US government that where we would have Department of Defense, Department of State, and USAID together to have some of these tough conversations, because you don't just get the toys and the guns and the planes. You also often need to take with it sort of holding up a mirror and looking at your own systems. And so I think it's just a continued conversation. I'll say, Yawei has been the penultimate, East-West divide for us at the Carter Center. And so he can probably answer a little bit more about how those conversations can continue.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. So Yawei, your final word, please.
My final word is, in 5 days, it's going to be the 20th anniversary of 9/11. On the day of 9/11, I was teaching an American history class at the local college. And I think it was during the break when, students heard the news and they started crying, in the hallway. And then the school basically decided no more school on that day. I think the central question for many Americans, it was a shocker. And they asked, why they hate us so much. I think, if we can transplant that into U.S.-China relationship, I think leaders from both sides need to pay attention to this central question, is that, I think both countries are now working toward, hating the other side kind of mode. And that is very dangerous. If you look at the U.S. leadership, if you look at the U.S. media, not only they say China influence, what they call malign influence all over the world, without looking fairly and squarely at what China has contributed, be it BRI and other COVID assistance issues, and also in some of the think tanks over here, NGOs, they also join that chorus, hating China, and also they're going after ethnic Chinese over here because the Justice Department has that China initiative that many members of Congress and many Asian American organizations want that to be dropped. So that's from the US side. Now from the China side, I acknowledge the Chinese leaders are not as vociferous as the American leaders when they talk about the other side. But the social media side is a different story. That hating America message is all over the place. And on August the 29th, this blogger, said there, everyone is aware there's critical changes taking place in China. One of the changes he talked about is that there is consensus among Chinese that US is launching a space war, a cyber war, a trade war, a high-tech war, you name it. Every aspect you can come up with is that US is launching a war against China. So this hating each other mode has to be stopped. If it's not going to stop, I don't know, there might be a 9/11 moment in this bilateral relationship. I don't want to scare people, but you think about it. In South China Sea, in East China Sea, over Taiwan issue and others, there is literally a possibility that US and China are going to go to war. So I think I want to end my remarks that peace is so important for both countries. And the leaders and the media managers, the think tanks, the NGOs, they all need to joint effort to de-escalate what is going on in the US, to try to debunk the myth. For example, US basically said, the Wuhan Virology Institute leaked the virus. The China said, it's for Dietrich that did that. This kind of misinformation campaign has to be stopped, and people's perception of each other, has to be changed. And I don't believe US has a conspiracy to make China collapse. And I don't believe the Chinese leaders want to edge out the US, from East Asia. Both countries are obligated to provide for their own people, but also to provide for the whole world and to work with people all over the world, to anchor peace and prosperity. So thank you, Henry, for giving us the opportunity to engage you and the audience, 200,000 of them, of our view, and hopefully we all share. The more we share, the more peaceful the relationship is going to be, and the more peaceful the world is going to be.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Yawei, and particularly thank Paige as well. Paige, you've been working through 3 administrations in the US government. And of course that also now you are the CEO of President Carter Center, and of course Yawei is the advisor of the Carter Center. So we are reviewing this today. In the last 42 years since President Carter established diplomatic ties, and which changed the U.S., changed China, and changed the world. I think China has actually, since then, really become one of the fast developing countries in the world. What we are really looking at the legacy today is that really we felt that there's so much, the world has changed so much, and we really have to self-reflect and to the reality of a contemporary 21st century. Probably we need to upgrade our thinking, and I totally agree with Yawei that nationalism, populism, that we cannot really let that out of hand and dictate or influence this political decision that made by both countries. I really think that today the world is so much intertwined and so much in common prosperity, and we really need each other. How can we really decouple? I mean, it's impossible and unimaginable, let alone to practice that. I think that is really unrealistic. So we have to think about in the 21st century and how we can cherish the legacy that President Nixon, President Carter, and President Bush has all established this foundation. The 3 communiques we had, and also the millions of people's exchanges and the billions of trade that we've been conducted among both sides, and investment as well. So we really need cool heads and particular dialogue. And that's why I think the Carter Center and CCG, we're having this kind of dialogue is really important, and to let public know that there's still rational thinking and how we can really make a situation not out of hand. And I agree with Yawei, there could be a 911 moment or hot issues that can really trigger unexpected things, because we are now in such a prosperity. Who wants to get into hot war? So it's really we need a cool head and need some realist thinking. But on the other hand, I think China is rising. We need to really understand China. We need to probably accept China. It is what has happened in Afghanistan, Iraq, and many other countries. It shows that there's no one model fits all. It has to be diversified. It has to be a country that adapt to its own situation. I think China is working on that path, and the U.S. has its path. We probably will never converge, but let's accept each other and let's work together. So I think that's what the President Carter's spirit and is. There's not going to be one model for fits everyone in the world. We have to live by diversity. We live by a multicolored world. So again, thank you both so much for for joining me tonight, and also on your Labor Day, on your early morning Labor Day, your holidays. So thank you, and thank our audience, and both in China and also other parts of the world. So we hope that we'll see you again. And while you visit China, please come to CCG. We'd like to have you again. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you. Okay,
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.